Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of On Air, an exciting one today because I'm joined by Guy Rubin, who's the founder and CEO of Ebsta. Guy will tell you a little bit more about himself in just a moment, but today we're going to be talking about a really interesting topic and a timely one as well, because this week Guy has got, or Ebsta has got their new sales insights benchmarking report coming out for 2022. They did their one last year in 2021, which was very well received. Lots of learnings in there. And Guy's going to tell us a bit more about that and a bit more about the impact of engagement on revenue and the notion of using data in sales a lot more. Firstly, Guy, thank you for joining us, and how are you?
Owen, thanks for having me. Yeah, doing great, thanks. Really enjoying being back in an office and having an office full of people. It's so refreshing to kind of get everyone back together again, and yeah, really excited about what the year ahead brings. Brilliant
stuff. Well, look, great to have you on. We'll get into the topic pretty quickly, but we always like to give our guests 2 minutes. Who's Guy and who's Ebsta for the people that don't know you?
Okay, so my name is Guy Rubin. I founded Ebsta about 10 years ago. We have about 1,000 customers using our platform, and really we're all about helping sales teams become a lot more data-driven. So if we think about kind of before the pandemic, sales teams really kind of bucked the trend and weren't particularly interested about being very data-driven. Most sales leaders tend to be salespeople that were brought up to a leadership role, and they're kind of, no, I know what's going on in the pipeline, I know what my team are doing. And then of course the pandemic hit, everyone started working remotely, and all of a sudden everyone woke up to the reality that they didn't have the data points they needed to really understand what was going on behind the scenes. So yeah, our market's absolutely boomed. We've seen over $1.5 billion worth of investment going into competitors of ours competing in this space we call revenue intelligence.
Very good, very concise. I don't even think you used the full 2 minutes. Impressive work. And look, fantastic. Great to hear. Obviously, you guys are growing rapidly, and the space is growing rapidly. I think you touched on a really interesting point there around sales leadership generally, and the notion that it's probably been done a bit more traditionally in the past on gut feel, instinct, face-to-face contact, and that's had to shift. Do you see people that were maybe stuck in their old ways embracing it, or is it a new set of leaders, a new kind of leader that's coming through and driving this?
That's a good question. I think everyone's woken up to the reality that if they want to scale, they do need to be data driven. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are just challenged with, what does that mean? Where do we start? And I think step one on this journey is you can't be data driven if you don't have the data. And we still live in a world, believe it or not, where lots of sales organizations are still relying on their most expensive resources, their salespeople, taking responsibility for administration. And in 2022, there are systems out there, Ebsta being one of them, that can take responsibility for logging all of your activity and making sure that every contact that the team are ever engaging with are in the system of record, in your CRM, or Salesforce for most people these days. And really having data certainty is the first line in the sand you need to aim for. And until you've got that, you can't be data driven if you don't have the data.
It's interesting. We've got an insights manager within the business, and he talks about baseline a lot. Everything needs a baseline first that you can rely on and then build on. And it feels like most businesses are starting to realize that they need to understand what their current existence looks like through data before they can decide what they need to do to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing we do when we onboard a customer is try and understand what good looks like for their business. So we might say analyze the last 1,000 deals that they've done, or every deal they've done in the last year or two, and try and understand the DNA of those deals. So how much engagement was required with which stakeholders at each stage of that sales process to achieve the outcome you were aiming for. And that outcome could be a win for a new business, it could be a renewal, it could be an upsell, a cross-sell. It doesn't really matter. What matters is looking at the activity, the engagement that took place prior to that event taking place, so that you can then replicate it and use that as a benchmark to identify risk in the live pipeline.
So Guy, what sort of data points are available for people? So I guess there's some obvious ones that everybody would know about, but there's probably some that people don't realize they've got access to.
Yeah, so look, we're not the only revenue intelligence platform on the market, okay? So there's lots of businesses out there trying to play in this space. The majority of them are really targeting much larger organizations, so the enterprise. And while these are phenomenal platforms, they are very complicated, and they are all about, there's, you know, a 12-month project of change management to get it into the business. We wanted to go a different way. So the approach that we've taken is to try and distill things down to a single metric. And I suppose the big breakthrough that we had when we were looking at the market was that we were able to see that there was a direct correlation between the amount of engagement, the relationships that you're building with the stakeholders involved in a sales process, and the chances of that sales actually closing. And so rather than worrying about, you know, the content of a particular email or the tone that's being used in a phone call, all we really measure is engagement. And so trying to move companies away from measuring activity in a world where you can push a single button and send 1,000 emails, activity measurements don't really count anymore. And what we need to do is move people away from measuring activity and instead measure engagement.
So by measuring engagement, let's go layman's terms for a second. What does that mean? What are we measuring? What are we actually looking for?
Okay, so really, as you'd expect, a meeting is more powerful than a phone call, which is more powerful than an email. And the velocity of that activity, if you had a dozen events happening within a day and back and forth, then that's better than in a quarter or a month. And then again, the stakeholders involved, the seniority of the individuals that are involved in each of those activities, those engagements. So, to give you a practical example, when we look at and here I don't have a copy of this year's, but this is the 2021 report we did for where we analysed $100 billion worth of pipeline across our entire customer base in every geography and every vertical. And what was really interesting is we can see that the more stakeholders involved in a sales process, the more likely they are to close. So on average across the world, we're seeing an average of 5 stakeholders involved in a sales process that closes 1, and only 3 in a sales process that closes lost. However, if you can get the number of stakeholders up to 9 or 10, then you're really maximising the chance of winning that deal.
I wondered if there was a point at which it starts to drop down, where it becomes too democratic and too many people trying to be involved in that decision.
Yes, it does. When you get above 12, the numbers start to drop off the other way. And again, what's interesting is that the 2022 numbers, without giving it all away, we actually see those numbers increase. So the complexity of sales processes is increasing, the number of stakeholders involved in sales processes is increasing, the number of days a sales process takes to close, either won or lost, is also increasing from last year to this year. There was a blip for about 3 months last year, as you'd expect. Middle of COVID, people were kind of hesitant to close business. But as a general rule, we're seeing a trend upwards. So yeah, things are getting more complicated.
Very interesting. I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about that in a moment. I'm just envisaging a sales rep going in, having 12 stakeholders and a 13th coming in and them saying, no, sorry, you're not allowed in. You're now reducing my chances of a sale. I wonder if anyone's brave enough to use the data to do that. Let's talk a little bit about your benchmark report, because I'm really keen to learn more about it. This is going out in the same week as you're pushing it out to the public for this year at least. And see, there were some great learnings from last year. What drove you to do it first? I'm keen to understand kind of what was the driver and how do you pull this data together so that we can learn from it?
Well, look, what we wanted the message we wanted the world to acknowledge was that you don't need more. So if you've got 100 leads coming in every month, you don't need more than 100 leads. What you need is to start improving the conversion rates at every stage of your sales process. Yep. And small incremental improvements at each stage can lead to exponential results. And that's really what we've been able to prove. So I'll give you another really interesting stat. We saw, again, bear in mind, this is the holistic numbers, so lots of different industries and verticals and geographies involved. But on average across the board, we saw an average sales cycle take 97 days if it closes off as 1. Okay, would you care to have a guess what the average number of days a deal that eventually closes off as lost stays in pipe?
I'm going to go double that at least.
That's it. So nearly doubled, right? Wow. So the amount, across the world, AEs are closing about 30% of the opportunities they open. They're closing about 30% of them off as closed won. But the 70% that are closing off as lost are taking twice as many mandates out of the sales reps' time. And so if we can help them to close those off quicker, then they can focus on better opportunities faster.
Isn't that interesting? That tells you a lot about the human psyche, doesn't it? Is that fear of failure, or is it a pride thing? I'm trying to understand the psychology behind that.
Well, I think reps feel that they've got to have quite a thick pipeline, so they've got stuff to talk about with their leader, with their sales leader or VP when they're doing their pipeline review meetings. Yeah. And the truth is that the leadership team need to be there to enable the sales team and help them to close things off lost quicker. Yeah. And again, by understanding the DNA of a deal that works in the past, so if you know that we need an average of 5 stakeholders involved at stage 3 of a sales process, and if you don't have an engagement of 75 or above with the CFO, then the chances are the deal's not going to close off as one anytime soon. Well, once you understand those data points, we don't need to bring the rep into the room and hear their narrative about how great they are. One of our customers calls it the blah blah. So we don't need to hear the blah blah. What we need to do is look at the data. And then once we understand the data, it might be that half their pipeline is in really good shape. Yeah. And rather than giving the rep the platform to talk about those great deals for half an hour and waste everyone's time, actually we can park those knowing that they're being looked after. And instead we can laser focus on the opportunities that need attention.
I'm guessing, I love this topic. I think there's so many questions going through my mind. So when we think about the buyer behavior, there's a consistency to some degree, isn't there? So like you say, if I reply to your emails faster, if I come back to you more regularly, if I ask more questions, there's lots of things that we can logically think of that make somebody more or less engaged. But there are also occasionally buyers that you or I would deem to be an exception. They behave in a way that most buyers don't behave. Is it fair to say, therefore, that the data informs and supports, but that we should always overlay it with human translation and with a bit of common sense and logic? Can you ever really just rely on the data alone?
I think that's a really fair point, right? So we're not saying this deal's bad, close it off. What we're saying is this deal needs some attention. You should have a look at it. And we deliver 7 positive and negative indicators on every deal in the pipeline. And so that the leadership can look at it and go, right, we're going to ask them these 3 questions when they come in and look at this particular deal. It might be that they're in this particular organization, the CFO and the CEO are actually the same person. So that's why we haven't got any engagement with the CFO. Kind of makes sense, right? But until you ask the question, you wouldn't know. So there's always exceptions, and we're not being definitive and saying, you can run this thing with a robot. We're saying that we're going to give you visibility of the deals that are in good shape and really highlight the ones that need attention, but most importantly, tell you what needs to be done, those 7 positive negative indicators.
And we talked a little bit earlier about the leaders, sales leaders adopting and being more comfortable adopting data. What about individual contributors? What do you see at that level?
Yeah, look, you always get a little bit of pushback with any sort of change. But again, by making it very easy for them to adopt, rather than giving them kind of 1,000 different things to look at and new dashboards they've never seen before, what we try and do is work with the dashboards they've already got. So if you're using Salesforce dashboards, let's enhance those existing dashboards with 1 more data point. And for the rep on the ground, they know that they're at stage 3 of this sales process. They should have an engagement score of 72 and they're at 47, right? So they know they're going to get picked up on that, and they can almost preempt it and try and push that number up before they have their weekly pipeline review meeting.
I think it's really smart of you, because you talked earlier about drilling it down to 1 single metric. So I think that really, I'm guessing, makes it a far more comfortable thing to adopt, because you're not layering in lots of new data points, lots of new information they've got to interpret. It's 1 single point, and I'm guessing that's been a real win for you.
Yeah, I mean, an absolute game changer. And again, we've seen the impact it's had on the customer base as well. And so the reps on the ground are easy to understand what's expected of them. This number needs to be higher than it is right now. The management team have got these insights, so they can leave the deals alone that are in good shape and really focus on asking the questions on the deals that are needed. And then for the leadership team, we don't just deliver a forecast of this is the number you're going to hit at the end of the quarter, but also here's the number you could hit if you address the negative factors we've identified in the pipeline review. So it's really giving them visibility of kind of the difference between those 2 numbers.
I'm guessing, and I'm always speculating with this stuff, so please do correct me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing there's a challenge, because we hear about it in every leadership forum I ever go to, and every roundtable we hear about the challenge with data, getting people to input data in the first place, getting people to actually use their CRM properly. I mean, God knows how many conversations you've sat around where you've heard that. How much of a challenge is that for you, presenting the insights that you can, that can clearly be very valuable if it's got the right data feeding into it? But I'm guessing there's some challenge there.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. So it's not unusual to find somewhere between 1/3 and 2/3 of a company's relationships never making their way onto the system of record. Okay, so how the hell can you be data driven if only 30% of the relationships that you're engaging with are in Salesforce? Wow. So that's the first challenge that companies need to address. And the way we do that internally is when we onboard a customer, our customers will connect up their mail service to our platform, and we'll go back over the last 3 years worth of email traffic to find every person they've ever engaged with, every company they've ever spoken to. And along with things like their contact details in their email signatures, and identifying who in the business holds the relationship, the date they last engaged, and whether the momentum of engagement is trending up or down over time, we put all of that data back into Salesforce the day they turn Ebsta on. So step one, deliver data certainty. Now you know that everyone's being captured, and most importantly, the reps are no longer responsible for creating contacts, keeping the contacts up to date over time, and adding and logging their activity, because the engine now does it for them. Now they're at the races. And if you think about it, most sales reps haven't been trained on how to use LinkedIn. But if you ask them, they spend an hour or two a day in LinkedIn looking at the data. Why are they doing that? Well, the answer is because it's a source of knowledge they can take advantage of. And what we need to recognize is that the CRM has the same potential, if not greater, because it represents not just a source of knowledge that's out there, but actually bespoke knowledge that only the organization within has. So if we can make the CRM as powerful or as consistent from a data perspective as LinkedIn, or even better, then the reps will want to spend time in that environment, and it becomes a virtuous circle.
If there's an opportunity or a prospect in our CRM, there's a sales rep that owns that in theory, or group, or whatever it works. But there are other departments in theory, like marketing, that might be touching that prospect in one way, shape or form. So I've got this vision of actually you're getting insight, not just from what you're doing. So I think it's very tunnel vision, aren't we? We've got the blinkers on. We assume that I'm the sales rep, I'm managing this opportunity, I'm the only one that's touching it. Meanwhile, marketing, they've had 3 emails from marketing in the time that you've been nurturing or trying to close off that deal. You haven't even thought about that. Have you manually gone down and looked in the history of that record in the CRM? Probably not. So I'm guessing the engagement isn't just from the sales rep themselves, but it's from every other department that's touching that, from the marketing emails and things that are going out around your work directly.
I think that's a really valid point. So again, let's talk about what topic are we talking about here? We're talking about revenue intelligence. Yeah. Okay. And engagement is a really powerful metric, but it's only one metric when we look at the entire view of revenue intelligence. So we can talk about all different industries and markets, but for example, in my world, which is B2B SaaS, there are really 3 metrics that we lean on internally. Okay. So the first is what we call intent metrics. So nothing to do with Ebsta. But as a business, you've probably identified the, say, 10,000 companies you're interested in selling to. Well, there's some really cool tools out there that will tell you of those 10,000, which are the 500 with high intent, which are the ones that are actively in a cycle of wanting to buy whatever it is that you're selling. Yeah. So getting those intent metrics, if your marketing team are not already doing it, I'd encourage them to look at things like Terminus, Bombora. Sixth Sense is a great one as well. So that will give you clarity around intent, and it does some really clever things to understand which of your prospects are actually in a buying cycle. The second data point is hours, so that's your engagement score. So okay, now we know the ones that we really should be engaging with. Of the 100 salespeople we've got, which of them are actually engaging with those target accounts? And you won't be surprised to hear that actually 75% of their time is spent on accounts that aren't targets or don't have high intent. And actually, we might want to use the data to make them aware of that and move them across to the accounts that they should be focusing on. And then the third data point that we lean on is a product score or a product engagement score. So this is, if you're offering a free trial, what buttons are they pushing? If you've got an existing customer, and let's not forget this, right? 80% of our revenue comes from existing customers, not new business, right? So we're all laser focused on how you win that initial customer, but actually supporting that customer and onboarding them correctly and nurturing them through the cycle, and then cross-sell, upsell, and so on is just as important, if not more valuable. And you'd be surprised how often we find that a customer that signed, an economic buyer that signed a contract, and then 12 months later they churn because no one bothered to maintain the relationship with the economic buyer. I mean, it sounds simple as you say it out loud, right? But as we all know, relationships drive revenue. So monitoring that engagement, monitoring those relationships gives you the tools you need to identify what needs attention.
Fascinating. I'm keen to just pull out. I know you won't want to give everything away because you want people to go and look at it, but pull out a couple more of these real gems from your insights report. So the things I've heard so far that I can remember, I've noted down here. We've got a 97-day average sales cycle for closed won deals. Do we have any sense? It sounds like the client base is reasonably broad. So I'm just wondering if there's any sense of kind of, are you able to segment that in any way, or give us a sense of the range? Because I'm guessing there's some that are a lot shorter and some that are a lot longer. Is there anything you can pull out of that particular metric for us?
They're all B2B, but they are in every geography and every vertical. So again, the report itself breaks down each vertical and each geography. So you can, and in fact, this year for the first time, the report goes further by looking not just at new business, but breaking up success renewals and upsells as well. So again, all of the data is in the report. And you can check it out. But to give you a few other data points, the time to close was a really interesting one. So the average time to close dropped by 50% when engagement went from good to great. So we bucket, everything's out of 100, as you'd expect, and we bucket engagement kind of 40 to 60, 60 to 80, 80 to 100, and so on. So when engagement is at 60 to 80, which you'd think would be good enough to get a deal over the line, and it may well be, but the close win rate goes up 5-fold when it goes from 60 to 80 to 80 to 100. Wow. And the time to close halves. So these are dramatic numbers that can have a massive impact over a 12-month period if you can get it right. So really getting the right stakeholders heavily involved in the sales process, having them bought into the journey that you've agreed upon, and then highly engaging, really over-investing in those relationships. I'll give you one quick example. We did what we call a RED report for a customer, and RED stands for Revenue Engine Diagnostic. So it's kind of a one-off exercise where we analysed the live pipeline and used the benchmark of previously closed won deals to identify that risk. And through this one-off exercise, we found they had 18 million euros worth of live pipeline in that kind of good but not great level of engagement, so 61 to 80. We got the team to overinvest, so all of the we got the kind of the C-levels to also get involved with sales processes and overinvest in those opportunities. And in that one quarter, they closed 6 million euros more than they were expecting to, just by moving the engagement bar from 61 to 80 to 81 and above. So overinvesting in the relationships and the deals that are already in play can have a material impact on your win rates.
It's just a really interesting point, because again, I'm just imagining the data. If you can shorten the sales cycle by half, and if you can increase the win rate by 5 times, the difference of just nudging some of those opportunities and accepting that some of them will drop off by working a bit harder and trying to sort of, like say, overinvest in that relationship. Some will push you away, and then what you're doing is you're clearing the space, but you're multiplying and shortening your opportunity to close the ones that probably would have closed, but would have closed a lot later and at a smaller percentage. I think that's an absolutely fascinating point, and it's a reminder to people that it's not just about your point earlier, activity, but it's about the quality of activity, the quality of the relationship, and the quality of engagement. I'm just, maybe you have a headline, maybe you don't. I'm just keen to understand that what is the impact of this? If people fully embrace the data you give them, if the data is well informed through sales reps actually putting the data in the first place into the CRM, and if things are ticking at a moderate to good level, because I don't think we can ever expect perfection in anything like this, what should people see? What's the sort of impact you'd expect?
Well, it's a good question. We've got a case study on our website for a business, a B2B SaaS business based on the West Coast. They joined us when they'd just done a raise at $100 million. Okay, 2.5 years later, they just raised at 1.8 billion. And this is by the CEO being absolutely focused on the whole business becoming very, very data driven.
Yeah.
So again, I kind of repeat the point I made earlier, which is there's good news here, right? You don't need more in the top of the funnel. This isn't about spending more on marketing and doubling the marketing spend. This is about incrementally improving each stage. And when you finish, you go back to the beginning and you go again. And just by getting a couple of % improvements at each stage of that journey, you can have an exponential set of results. And it's not unusual to see an individual rep's number double, as in their contribution to the bottom line doubling in the first year, just by becoming a lot more data driven, and the sales team around them, whether it's revenue operations or the sales leadership, actually just enabling that salesperson by really focusing in on what we can do to help them close more business faster, or most importantly, close off and fail faster as well.
Yeah. I've got one more question, but if you've got anything else to add that I've missed, because I think I could easily have 1,000 questions on this, please do. I'm keen to understand some practical, give people listening to this who are individual contributors, some practical, and leaders, I guess, that can talk to their team, some practical things that they can do to increase engagement, because it's one thing to say, those guys are in the 60 to 80 brand, you need to get them up to the 80. Well, what does that really mean? How does a rep go about doing that? Do they move virtual meetings to face-to-face, and that's better than, for example, phone calls to virtual meetings? What should they be doing to get that score up?
Look, I think there's a number of things you should be doing, right? So as a business, you're in 2022, right? So whether it's Ebsta or any other platform, you need to take responsibility for logging activity, creating contacts, and keeping those contacts up to date away from the reps. Yeah. Okay, you can put really powerful engines in place that give you certainty that everything's being captured. Oh, and by the way, free them up from all this admin that they don't want to do anyway. So that would be the first thing I'd do. Achieve data certainty, and it doesn't need to be a 12-month project. You should be able to put something in place and be up and running within a couple of weeks if you bring the right partner in to really solve that problem. Because the truth is, the data already exists in your business, it's just in the wrong place. It's more often than not in the mailboxes and calendars of either your live staff or the people that have recently left. Yeah. So solve the data quality issue first would be the first thing I'd say. The second thing is use the past, okay? Your benchmark, is it 3 stakeholders, is it 5, is it 7? I don't know, right? But the beauty is the data's in your systems. Your systems will tell you what stakeholders have been involved in every deal you've closed in the past. So try and understand what that looks like. And again, we're one supplier, there's others out there, but do the analysis. The past is a great indicator. And then use that to set the benchmark. And that benchmark will give you visibility of what needs to be done in the live pipe, and stop falling down the trap of allowing the sales rep to wax lyrical about how great they're doing on those opportunities. Because either they're focusing on the ones that they're doing great at, and actually you can leave them alone and focus on the others, or they're glossing over the stuff that they're telling you how great they've got this engagement, but in reality they're engaging with an influencer, not a decision maker. Yeah. So you need to move away from the narrative, or the blah blah, as my customer calls it, and you need to focus on the data to really understand. Look, we know we need engagement with the CFO on this type of deal. You've given me a great story about how great we're doing, but why haven't we got engagement with the CFO? And because actually it's self-policing, right? A CFO is not going to spend 2 hours reviewing contracts unless you're at contract review stage. Yeah. So it's a beautifully self-monitoring and policing service, because you can actually see whether they're actually giving you the time that they should be if you're at the stage that the sales rep says they're at.
Fascinating. So, Guy, how can people get hold of this report? What's the best way to do it? I know it's releasing now or this week as this goes out. Where
yes, so it'll be on the front page of Ebsta.com. It's free to download. Go and enjoy. It's our contribution to the community. So yeah, if you go to Ebsta.com, you'll see a banner at the very top, and from there you can download the report. And I'd welcome any feedback as well. So you can reach me. As I say, I'm Guy Rubin. You can reach me via LinkedIn. Or GuyRubin@Ebsta.com, and I'd love to hear from anyone and get your thoughts and feedback on the above.
And final question, I always have 2 things to wrap up. One is, how can people get in touch with you, and who should? You've done one of them, you're a pro at this, clearly. Who should talk to Ebsta? So who should be coming and talking to you and learning about the product, and who are the sorts of businesses that you can help?
So we are very focused on B2B, and really I'm passionate about talking to anyone with a responsibility for a sales team. So VPs of sales, chief revenue officers, CEOs that want to become more data driven, reach out, let's have a Zoom and have a chat from there.
Love it. Guy, thank you so much. I've genuinely really enjoyed the conversation, learning stuff. I can't wait to read the report properly as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Owen. Really enjoyed the session.
Pleasure.
Take care.